Psalm 89 is such a stark contrast to Psalm 88. I pointed out earlier how in Psalm 88, the writer seems completely cut off from God's care. And as you read down through the psalm, you'll see that he indeed reflects upon his grief, his lowliness. And even though he calls out to God regularly, or at least in this desperate situation, he wonders if God will even answer. So he cries to help for God, and yet God seems to have hidden his face. That is, he doesn't seem to think that this person's situation is grave enough in order to respond. And as you continue to scroll down through the psalm, you'll see how his despair deepens to the point that at the conclusion of Psalm 88, you have to wonder if this person has any hope whatsoever. And so as he closes out the psalm, look at how he sees that darkness is his closest friend. Darkness. Is there any other statement of despair that comes more lowly than that? Contrast that with the beginning of Psalm 89. For at the beginning of Psalm 89, you can immediately see that he starts out with a much different tone. He wants to sing of the Lord's great love forever. So he has turned from darkness to hope and recognizes that God's faithfulness will continue. He moves on to reflect upon the creation and upon God's character. And if you ever wonder whether or not you can gain any theology out of the Bible directly, certainly you can by going to the Psalms, for the Psalms are loaded with rich teaching and instruction about who God is, about his character, about his righteousness, his justice, his holiness, as you can see in such verses as expressed here. And the writer moves on from a reflection upon God's power, his righteousness, his character, to the promise that he made to David that out of his line would come an eternal king. This has been one of the main lines, one of the story plots or storylines, as many of my students like to say, in the book of Psalms, how God has promised from the beginning of Psalms 1 and 2 to raise up an eternal king, that those who take refuge in him will reign with this king, and those who oppose him will be destroyed. And yet this psalm takes another turn where it notices how the people have not been faithful to God, even though he has been faithful to them. And so the writer continues to trust in God, that God is going to keep his promises no matter what. One more aspect I want to point out is reflected or expressed here in verses 26 through 29, where God refers to this eternal king as the one who's going to be his firstborn over all creation. In Psalm 1, or excuse me, Colossians 1, verses 15 through 20, Paul instructs the people about Jesus Christ, who he is, the Son of the Most High, the invisible God, the ruler, the agent through whom creation was made. And this Son of God is the firstborn of all creation. So Psalm 89 raises a question that I did not point out, but I will go back to. Here's the question that each and every one of us will face and need to wrestle with. Who can live and not see death, or who can escape the power of the grave? This is a question that arises out of all that has been instructed, reflected, prayed, and spoken of to this point in the Psalms. And it's a question that I suggest to you has an answer. Jesus Christ is the one who can rescue from death, from the power of the grave. And that is what Paul reminds the Colossian Christian believers of in the passage that I just pointed there to in Colossians. Look to Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the firstborn of all creation. He is the one to whom this psalm and every other psalm, whether as individuals or collectively, point to. He is the one who can rescue from the power of the grave.